Hey friends, so this is a weird video, but I think we're overdue for a weird video. A number of people talk about simulation theory, and they find something about it that is almost reassuring. It's reassuring to know or to think that we live within a simulation, that we live within some kind of computer program. For some reason, that gives people reassurance. Elon Musk has said that the chances of us living in the original reality versus in some kind of simulation of that original reality, the odds of that are billions to one. In other words, there's probably only one original reality from which our simulation is based, and there are probably thousands or millions or billions of these simulations. So I don't know why this reassures people, because unless we're in a simulation where telekinesis is possible, where you can move objects with your mind, or unless we're in a simulation where you can engage in very sophisticated conversations with other people without opening your mouth, telepathy, unless we're living in one of those simulations, it really doesn't matter if we're in quote-unquote original reality or in some simulation from the 26th century. We could be living in a computer, in a server right now from the 2600s that's sitting on some university campus, and they could be doing a simulation of what life was like on Earth in the early, in the early 21st century. And there's really no way for us to disprove that, but I don't find it reassuring. The important thing is that it really doesn't matter. We still feel pain and happiness. We still live and die, and you still get kicked out of your apartment or house if you stop paying your rent or mortgage. So the simulation theory really doesn't matter, but what's intriguing to me is this notion of hidden history, this notion that we only live for about 50 to 80 years on average. And of course, there's a drop-off in stamina and in intelligence if you live longer than that usually. But we live for a very short period of time. We don't have the full window of things that happened before us. We can read some history books. We can infer. But those history books are not all that solid. I was reading a book about ancient Rome, and I started wondering on the flight, I was like, where is this woman getting all of these things from? How does she know that this is how they did it? And if you actually look into her footnotes, she's citing other historians who were citing other historians who were citing some archaeologists back in the 1800s that dug some of this stuff up. So it's like a game of telephone. And, I don't think that we've gotten the broad strokes wrong. I think Julius Caesar's name was really Julius Caesar. I think events really did happen in largely the way that they're portrayed. But daily life, daily diet, daily attitudes, these are things that historians are basically guessing about because they don't have all of the first-hand information, and they weren't there. And they're basically quoting archaeologists, as I said, from the 1800s, and these archaeologists are long dead, and they practiced a form of archaeology and a form of science that you could argue was more primitive and was not as observant of things like disturbing the site you're working on and all that stuff. So not as precise as archaeologists today. And yet that's our basis for understanding history. So the historical Jesus, I think we can all agree, lived about 20 centuries ago. And I use that just as a goalpost. So we're living about 20 centuries ahead of biblical times. A lot of stuff has happened during that time. We've gone from sandals and wine to, still sandals and wine, but now also cars and space travel and aircraft that move at 550 miles an hour routinely, commercial jets that move that fast, the internet, broadband, smartphones. So we've come a long way in terms of our technology. A lot has happened. There have been a lot of wars, the Civil War, World War I, World War II. There's been so much conflict, and despite these incredible advances in technology, it seems like in many ways there's more destruction and more anger and more suffering than ever before on our planet. Judith Miller, a mainstream media Muppet, who actually looks surprisingly like a Muppet. She looks like a Muppet. Judith Miller, a reporter at the New York Times, was responsible for furthering the fake narrative the fake news narrative. Fake news was a thing even back then. She's responsible for furthering the narrative in the New York Times that Iraq was sitting on weapons of mass destruction and lying to us about it. And as a result of her reporting, which was magnified by the administration at the time, by an administration that wanted to go to war, we went to war. And more than 1 million Iraqi civilians were killed during that process. So a death of 1 million people or more, when you include our soldiers and all of the casualties on both sides, 1 million or more people dead in the grave because some muppet at the New York Times lied about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. And if you go back further, the causes for many wars and many conflicts that lead to a rapid loss of life seem to be often initiated by the mainstream media, by lies within the mainstream media that enough people believe, and then we are led into war. And it seems like this keeps happening. Again, we are 20 centuries ahead of biblical times. To them, to the people with the sandals and the wine, we are living in the distant future. We're actually living 1 year after the destination point from that movie in the 80s, Back to the Future. So we're living in the future. It's here. And yet, why are there still so many deaths in the Middle East? Why is ISIS bigger and stronger than ever? Why is it that Hillary Clinton, a woman who had a suspected pedophile, a suspected sadistic Satanist who tortures kids, now there are alleged videos of this stuff surfacing online. Why did Hillary Clinton pick that person to be her campaign chairman? Why did she want him to be her Secretary of State? That's a little weird, but let's actually go back in time. So the WikiLeaks emails, me and many others focused mostly on the Pizzagate related emails because that seemed most crucial, but there are other emails in Hillary Clinton's WikiLeaks and in John Podesta's WikiLeaks that are highly troubling. In Hillary's emails, for example, Sidney Blumenthal, a longtime Clinton advisor, he appears to be ghostwriting and guiding mainstream media articles. And the point of these articles is to make it seem preposterous that a couple of families, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, have undue influence over our politicians and over U.S. foreign policy. Now, why is a guy that busy who works for Hillary Clinton, why is he penning these ghost-written articles to make it seem like it's totally absurd, totally batshit insane to think that the Rothschilds control anything at all? And yet, in some of Hillary's other emails, she's basically groveling to Lynn Rothschild. It's a language that doesn't appear with anybody else she contacts in her emails. Hillary is usually quite brief in her emails, just a few words. But when she interacts with Lynn Rothschild, it turns into a groveling, weird interaction, like something out of Game of Thrones. So why is that? And why is it that Lynn Rothschild, according to the New York Times, she was the one who led a fundraiser for Hillary, an elite fundraiser, $100,000 per plate to go to that fundraiser. Think about that. The cost of a 4-year education is how much you'd have to pay for one plate of food at Rothschild's fundraiser for Hillary Clinton's campaign. That's really progressive, isn't it? That's really looking out for the little people, isn't it? There's nothing progressive about Hillary. She was this bag of shit that they wrapped up in a pantsuit, and they tried to push her on us using the mainstream media, which they own. I want to know why Sidney Blumenthal is furiously ghostwriting articles making us believe that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are not powerful people, when it appears in Hillary's emails that is not the case. And if you look at Hillary's schedule, which was also leaked in the WikiLeaks, who she's actually meeting with in person, it seems like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds get her attention more than almost anybody else on the planet. And so, what is actually going on here? And you can see paranoia against the Rothschilds is alive and well on the internet. This is some graphic I just brought up. It says, "Hello there, my name is Jacob Rothschild. My family is worth $500 trillion. We own nearly every central bank in the world. We financed both sides of every war since Napoleon. We own your news, the media, your oil, and your government. You have probably never heard of me." So As far as we own your media, The Economist magazine, which was a respected business publication, a respected business and politics news publication, The Economist magazine is actually owned by Lynn Rothschild. And as the publisher of The Economist, you can see that it has shifted under her stewardship, that it has become this hysterical anti-Trump rag. And you can go back and look through older issues, and you can see that it was a pro-Hillary mouthpiece throughout the election. It was not unfair. It was not unbiased. It was very unfair toward Donald Trump, and it wrapped itself up in this outfit like, oh, we're just economists, we're just thinkers, and yet it was just total political propaganda. Well, why is it that the Rothschilds own that magazine? Here's another quote: "Money is the god of our time, and Rothschild is his prophet." Now, I don't think that one family should have that much power. This is multi-generational wealth. So the guy who started this banking family back in the 1700s, nice guy he was, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." Humble guy. So this was where they were at as a family back in the 1700s. 300 years ago, they were bragging about controlling the British money supply, which at the time was one of the most powerful empires in the world. And they've had 300 years to grow and to concentrate their wealth. And so to close this video out, I think there's been an enormous effort to make it seem like the New World Order is insane and just a conspiracy theory. There's been an effort from people like Sidney Blumenthal to make us believe that the Rothschilds have faded. They don't have the wealth they used to have, even though if you think about it mathematically, they probably have more than ever. And the same with the Rockefeller family. Of course, J.D. Rockefeller was the wealthiest person in America a century ago. Where did that money go? I'm sure it hasn't all been squandered. I'm sure his children still have a lot of it and have been reinvesting it, which leads to further growth. Imagine 300 years of interest on the obscene amount of money that Rothschild had in the 1700s, and then imagine the fact that the Rothschild family, as you can read, for a while they were only giving their money to male heirs to keep the wealth as concentrated as possible. So these people have a lot of money, and you could see the Rothschild heirs right after the election was called for Donald Trump, just hysterical psycho shit, as if their whole way of life was coming to an end. And maybe their way of life is coming to an end, because millions of us now know about this stuff thanks to the WikiLeaks, and we're not going to be quiet. We want answers for email ID 1606. Why is Lynn Rothschild, regardless of how much money she has or how much money she married into, why is it that Lynn Rothschild gets updates like that from the Secretary of State of the United States? Why is this happening? How powerful is this woman that she's getting personal updates like that, even on the whereabouts of Tony Blair, another head of state? That's very bizarre. So let's focus on this family, because I'm not impressed with what I've seen so far. I'm really not. Let's focus on these Rothschilds. Is it true that they're financing both sides of political movements? Is it true that they throw human beings into unnecessary wars because their belief system is different from ours, because they are not Judeo-Christian, because they actually worship something which could be described as Satan, and they actually believe that when they increase the amount of human suffering through debt or through insolvency or through warfare, through humans killing each other, that honors their God, who is Satan. So, if they are the prophet of money, which God are they appealing to for information and for insight? I don't like this level of deception. I don't like the fact that Sidney Blumenthal is ghostwriting nonsense to make us think that the Rothschilds are just a conspiracy theory, when in Hillary's own emails, it seems like they're not a washed-up family. It seems like they still very much have a lot of power, and at least enough power to own The Economist magazine and to influence our politics in that way. But I suspect the influence goes much, much deeper than that. So real quick, what are the big takeaways here? Well, I was watching a Terence McKenna lecture last night on YouTube. I love McKenna. And he had said in this particular lecture, he had said that if you have a model of science or a model of understanding and coincidences keep popping up that you cannot explain, then maybe you don't have such a good theory of reality, right? Because if you're constantly accommodating all of these coincidences, then your theory, your mathematical model, whatever it is, it's just not sound. There's something wrong with it if you're constantly needing to adjust for outside events. And that's sort of how I feel about history. Again, we are 20 centuries forward from biblical times. We are living in the distant, distant future. We have technology that to people even a couple generations ago would be regarded as magical. Things like the smartphone with high definition video recording, right all there in the palm of your hand. That's pretty incredible stuff. And yet, despite this, there's more violence and suffering than there's been in a long time. Who is it that's funding ISIS and keeping them organized? It costs a lot of money to do that. Who is it that's keeping us divided, the media dividing us and causing riots and protests around the world? It costs a lot of money to maintain media networks and to maintain satellite broadcast. Who is doing all of this stuff? Who is keeping us unnaturally divided? Because most people I interact with, either here in the United States or up in Canada or in Europe, they all seem like very, very nice people for the most part. Pretty much every part of America I've lived in, the majority of people seem very, very nice and considerate. So why is it that when most of us are so nice and considerate, we're noticing these floods of refugees, mass rapes in countries like Sweden? Why is the world falling apart? Well, look at where the money's going and look at what the media is doing to us, intentionally dividing, intentionally lying, intentionally weakening our leadership. It's unusual stuff, and I want to know, where is the money coming from? Again, all of this stuff costs a lot of money. You don't create ISIS for free. You don't pay somebody like Jake Tapper or Megyn Kelly with money that comes from nowhere. It must all be coming from somewhere. How is this even possible? How is this level of propaganda and hatred and modern warfare and surveillance, how is it all even possible when at the individual level we all seem to be very nice and considerate people for the most part, and we all seem to be curious and interested in getting the real information? You know, people are on their smartphones all day. They're not looking for lies. They're looking for facts. Thank you for watching.
You're watching the David Seaman channel on YouTube and VidMe. Be sure to subscribe below.